All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. I'm your host, Matt Heinz. Very excited to have you here. Hopefully, you are here to learn more about B2B sales and marketing. And if you are live, if you're watching us live on LinkedIn today, very excited that you're here. It's part of your work day. If you are joining us live on LinkedIn, you have an opportunity to be part of the show. If you have a question for our guest today, if you have a comment on today's topic, certainly want to be able to address that in the session today, and we can bring you in live. If you're listening or watching on demand, thank you very much for watching, for downloading, for subscribing. Every episode of Sales Pipeline Radio, we've got hundreds of episodes in the can now, but every episode's available on demand at salespipelineradio.com. Very excited to have with us as our guest today, Jonathan Spier. He's the CEO of Rev, multi-time founder, advisor, investor. And Jonathan, excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Matt. I'm a big fan of the show. Glad to be here.
So there was a lot of topics that we said we might want to talk about here. I certainly want to talk about sort of mistakes companies make in who they choose to sell to, how companies sort of build out their addressable market. But I think something that I've seen in a lot of materials from Rev is this concept that the future of sales is above the funnel. Can you describe what that means and why that's important?
Absolutely, you bet. It's something I'm really passionate about. Having been in the B2B space for a long time and built sales teams, and you've seen it. Over the last 25 years, we've gotten better at every level of the sales stack. We're so much better now at nurturing leads, at managing transactions, even post sale. But in a way, we sort of take it for granted. That very first step, figure out who you should be talking to in the first place. Mm-hmm. In a way, we kind of still let that be, almost random. It's just in a lot of cases, just up to the reps or up to SDRs to figure that out. We call that space above the funnel, and we think it's time to change that and start bringing some order to the chaos above the funnel.
Well, who you sell to matters, right? And I think that, a lot of companies sort of, sometimes aim a little too large when they think about their target addressable market. Say, okay, who can we sell to? Well, we're in healthcare, so we can sell to anyone in healthcare, right? Well, yes and no. What companies actually need your service right now? Which of them are poised to buy? Talk a little bit about sort of the difference between an addressable market and maybe a serviceable, obtainable market, and why that differentiation is so important.
Oh, sure. I mean, what you're saying, first of all, is exactly right, which is that, we know where we gravitate. We gravitate to companies we know because we've worked with them in the past or we've heard of them. And that's natural. Like, we'll all do that when we're selling. But as strategists, if we want to plan a smart go-to-market, we should be thinking differently. We should be thinking about that TAM and SAM. And the real first way to do that is to recognize that your target market has characteristics. Buyers have common problems because they're built and they execute in similar ways. And identifying the universe of companies that share a problem because they're structured the same way, have the same kinds of challenges, is absolutely super important. And first of all, a lot more important, a lot more relevant than the old school way of doing it. It's just looking at industries. Industry just, in the end of the day, doesn't tell you enough to make those decisions.
Well, I can't tell if I'm frozen or if Jonathan's frozen. It could be that Jonathan's frozen here. So if that's true and you can hear me, I'm going to keep going. Hopefully he comes back. Let's see here. Jonathan is frozen. All right. Well, hopefully we can get him back. I think one of the things I was going to bring up, and I'll ask him a question around this here in a second if we get him, is the Gartner data that I saw from a couple of years ago, and it's still relevant today, that they looked at sort of sales readiness amongst a bunch of companies. And they found that 3 to 4% of any given market is actively buying, meaning they're in market right now. They're ready to buy. 46% of most markets, and this is looking across B2B markets, 46% of markets are what they call poised. And I think it's really relevant to today's conversation around who you sell to, because who is poised may be someone who actually needs what you're selling. But why are they poised? Why are they not actively buying? Well, maybe they don't understand the problem. Maybe they haven't quantified the problem. Maybe they have bigger problems that they know of that they're addressing right now. But what of those factors, what of those intent signals, what of those factors that exist within the company, exist around the company, can actually proactively move people from a poised phase to an actively buying phase. I think that's one of the things we got to look at as sellers, because it's not just about anymore like building a target account list and then selling to that perpetually. Your account, the list of people you should sell to is going to change on a regular basis. Maybe not every day, but at least on a quarterly basis. I think it's important to say, okay, who are we selling to and why? What criteria exists for some of those organizations to buy as well? What didn't exist for a company a month ago but exists today? What existed a month ago but doesn't exist today? And so if you think about those criteria as valuable, I think you're going to get to you get to a better dynamic target list. Jonathan, we're excited to have you back. I tap danced as well as I could while you were gone. But we started to get into this concept of exographics and some of the detailed information that you don't get in a typical database, right? Okay, mid-market healthcare companies in the Midwest. That may be a nice starting point. But what else do I need to know about some of those companies to know which I should sell to? So I think people have heard of demographics, psychographics, firmographics. Exographics is a little different. Can you define that and give some examples of what that is?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, it's the fundamental problem above the funnel is figuring out who's a good fit for your ICP and who isn't. And the problem with some of those other data types like firmographics is there's just too many companies that look exactly the same. You take companies like John Deere and Caterpillar, same industry, industrial machinery, same number of employees, roughly, same size, roughly. You can't learn anything about those two companies from just industry and size information. What exographics are, it's a concept that Rev has really popularized. It's information about how a company actually executes. For example, Cat happens to be an early adopter of new technology. Deere is a little more conservative, a bit of a mid adopter. Cat is aggressive to the cloud. Deere a little later to that. Cat has a almost pure B2B focus. Deere has a mix, B2B and B2C. Those are three different dimensions, exographics, that tell you a lot about those companies. Now, which one should you sell to? It depends. It depends what you're selling. You might want the early adopter, or you might want the late adopter, but knowing that difference lets you hone in much more accurately on who's a great prospect.
It really does. It's a really good example. I like that one. The other one that I would use is we've helped we helped a large software company in Redmond, won't give the name of them, but large software Redmond based company, sell into school districts. And you would think that, okay, well, let's target the biggest school districts, the biggest by number of students, right? Well, okay. But like when you're going to market, like what are some other factors involved? We found out that there's a role called a curriculum technologist. Didn't know about that before. Some districts have them, some don't. If they have one, it means they're more advanced in the way they think about technology. Things like how are technology decisions made? Are they made at the district level or the school level? Like the New York Board of Education is the third largest school district in the country, and technology decisions, at least back then, were made at a school level. Now, we did all this math and came with these criteria and sort of said A, B, C targets for who we wanted to sell to and what we were willing to do to try to acquire them. That data changes. So one of the things I mentioned when you were gone, Jonathan, is like, okay, you can put these criteria in place. You can build a target sales list today, but the market continues to change. The variables in and around your customers change as well. So your target sales list is going to be fluid over time. Talk about like what you've seen there and any recommendations for how often people need to be revisiting both the set of criteria they're using as well as who's on that sales list.
Yeah, it needs to be dynamic, and that's part of the challenge we've all had. When we leave it up to the reps, SDRs, or what have you, to just sort of go out there and do their best. Like, they're great. Even a great hardworking rep is still, guessing at that point. And you're right, the data changes. So what companies have been doing, creating a single static list, and they create it every few years. It just gets always bigger. You're bound to end up wasting time either having to re-research those companies or just talking to the wrong people to begin with.
Yep.
And our recommendation is that it is dynamic. I mean, that is the power of AI and making some of these exographic type criteria constantly visible. At the same time, you don't want to overwhelm the team with constantly shifting data. So we think of it a lot like Google Maps. Google Maps is so good at knowing, you're trying to get from point A to point B, and they do a great job telling you when there's some traffic building ahead, but they'll only really reroute you if there's, a 5-minute delay or longer, those kind of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we think about the product we've built, which is our sales development platform. Number one, it's generate highly relevant target account lists. And number two, it's wait for the changes that are truly meaningful and push those through to the sales team, through Salesforce, push them through to Marketo or Outreach or wherever else you need that data, but do it when there's a real and meaningful change, which we think is at least monthly, which is, by the way, far more often than most people are doing it. So monthly or quarterly, at absolutely least, this data should be refreshed. Got it.
We're talking today on Sales Pipeline Radio with Jonathan Spier. He's the CEO of Rev. You can check him out at getrev.ai. So everything we're talking about here in terms of getting even more precise in who we should be selling to. Let's talk about the other side of this. What's the opportunity cost of not being this precise? I would imagine it's, has an impact on your close rates and your sales efficacy, but probably also on your churn. Because just because someone is willing to buy doesn't necessarily they have the criteria to be successful with what you're selling. And I think that's a variable that not a lot of companies think about, but as more and more companies, especially startups, start focusing on this concept of NRR, net retained revenue, that has an impact on who you sell to from the very beginning, right?
I think that's what the smart RevOps people are really seeing and realizing out there. It's, they're responsible for the entire system, the entire funnel. And one of the best ways you make the entire funnel better is by having better input. If the targets going into the funnel fundamentally fit your ICP really well, because they're structured in a way and they have the types of challenges, well, in a way, like every metric can be improved. They close faster, they spend more, and they stick with you longer, which is really all those elements of NRR.
How does this change then a company's go-to-market strategy? Because I could argue that if we need to be this precise and this dynamic in who we're selling to, does this make things like inbound irrelevant? Does this make inbound, like going in prioritizing SEO, is that a lower priority for companies that are leaning in on this?
Listen, inbound's hugely important. We all love inbound, right? Nothing better than, when you do a webinar, you're on Sales Pipeline Radio and folks call you up after. Is there nothing better than that? And I think over the last few years, we've gotten better. We as an industry have gotten better at inbound, recognizing that, it's even better than a form fills if someone's just on your site to begin with and using some of that intent data and so on. So I wouldn't say this is an instead of a replacement. It's an augment too. It's the other side of it. Because even companies with a really strong marketing initiatives that have, a very strong inbound flow, they're still going to get 70% of their leads, give or take, from an outbound effort of some sort. And remember, there's a lot of flavors of that too. Sometimes the outbound is your core market. You're trying to generate pipeline. In other cases, it's the next new segment you're going after, where too often, especially in a new segment, we all have less awareness of who the big players are. We don't know the segment as well. Trying to refine the messaging is happening sort of fast and furious. In those kinds of situations, attacking the segment with much better data about who you're going after and why, because of those characteristics they share that are important to you, that changes things. It's an accelerant really for that outbound motion.
Well, and you can evaluate those inbound deals better too, right? Like I think, and again, this isn't meant to be a pitch for Rev, but if you have someone coming in, I tend to think, I think you're right, first of all, about inbound. I think that, I think about this in terms of where you're proactive and where you're reactive. You're proactive is saying, here are the companies I should be selling to, and you have an outbound motion to them. As you are reactive, as companies come to you, you still need to be qualifying them. Just because they say, hey, I like what you're doing, I'd like to see more about it, you should be saying, okay, like, are these companies that actually can benefit from what we're selling? Are they companies that can afford what we're selling? And the same methodology used to build your list, you can evaluate inbound leads and say, how high do they score on the exographic scale? And that tells you how hard you want to lean in with some of these companies. Like with some, you may not push that hard. You may not invite them to the VIP event at the conference next month, right? Because they don't have as high a likelihood to sell. They're not as close to your target. target profile. So I think it does really change. It doesn't necessarily change the prioritization of inbound. It changes the discipline and precision with which you triage those opportunities that come in.
Oh, absolutely. It changes how you think about the next steps. It could also change personalization and how you do the outreach. It really is it's about being able to rapidly identify the fitness of any account. Do they fit your ICP or not? And the best sales reps, the best SDRs do that, sort of automatically. But doing it at scale, doing it when you're entering new markets, doing it when you have a larger team, those things get real tough. Tough to operationalize, tough to teach, without a consistent way of modeling it and bringing it to life.
Well, we got last question here as we wrap up with our guest today, Jonathan Spier. He's the CEO of Rev at getrev.ai. It's been an interesting year, man. I mean, we started the year kind of full throttle, and then all of a sudden, I feel like the last few months we've kind of been like a 15-year-old learning how to do a stick shift, right? We're just kind of like sputtering forward, not really sure what kind of market we're in. And consistently, I'm hearing from companies that say their sales cycles have expanded, right? Demand has not changed, need has not gone away, but just confidence right now in making a decision has changed. I mean, it seems to me that this is yet another reason why the exographics are so important, because you're far more likely to have a company that has a precise need when you have that criteria in place.
Yeah, we've actually seen a big surge of interest in what we're doing this year. I think for some of those reasons, it's even more important. Companies have to do more with less right now. They need output in an uncertain time, and you get better results when you target people who are a better fit. It's that simple. And so, number one, that's true. The other thing that we've really seen kick up right now is increased attention on the existing customer base. So a lot of companies we work with, especially if they've got a product-led growth kind of motion, the question is, which one of our existing 10,000, 20,000 customers should we go after? Who should we upsell? Who's a better candidate in this market than they might have been last year? Those are all places where exographics can really help, and we're seeing an increased interest there.
Love it. Love it. Well, thanks again so much for joining us today. If you want to learn more about Rev, definitely check out getrev.ai. Jonathan Spier, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for watching, listening to another episode. You got some hopefully good insights, some good ideas around your target account list. You'll have to see me tap dance a little bit in the middle there. All good fun, nothing like live broadcasting. But thanks everyone for listening and watching. We'll see you again next week on Sales Pipeline Radio.